The price of disrespect, how one comment shattered my engagement forever. I had always believed in love at first sight. There was something magical about the way it felt when you met someone who seemed to fit every piece of your puzzle, someone who made you believe that life was finally aligning the way you'd always imagined. For me, that someone was Olivia. We had been together for 3 years, and in that time she had become everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She was smart, witty, ambitious. Everything about her made me feel like I had found my match. I thought I had it all figured out. I even proposed to her 6 months ago, feeling sure that I had found the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. Olivia had a way of making everything seem effortless. She could make me laugh even on my worst days, and she had an infectious energy that brightened up every room she walked into. We shared so many goals, dreams, and even values. I was proud of her, of us. My family liked her too, or so I thought. There had been subtle comments here and there, little jabs that I brushed off at the time. My sister once mentioned, "Olivia has some strong opinions, doesn't she?" I laughed it off, thinking it was just a difference in personalities. My mom once quietly told me she can be a little sharp sometimes, but if you're happy, that's what matters. I shrugged it off, assuming they didn't know her as well as I did. I loved her, and that's all that mattered, right? But then there was the issue of money. We both came from very different backgrounds. I grew up in a comfortable home with parents who worked hard to give me everything I needed, even if we weren't wealthy. Olivia, on the other hand, came from a family that struggled to make ends meet. Money was a constant source of stress for her, and I understood that it shaped the way she saw the world. But we made it work. We'd had a few small arguments about finances, who doesn't? But I thought we were on the same page. I thought we could navigate those differences together, and maybe, just maybe, those little cracks I'd ignored in our relationship would never be enough to break us. I was wrong. I had no idea how wrong I was until that night, the night everything changed. The evening was supposed to be about honoring my father, remembering his life, his kindness, the little things that made him who he was. We gathered at my sister's house, a quiet gathering of close family and friends sharing stories over a simple meal. The kind of evening where memories flowed as easily as the conversation, where laughter filled the room as people recounted the quirks of a man who had meant so much to so many. At first, everything was going perfectly. My family was in good spirits, laughing at old jokes, sharing memories of my dad's strange habits and the way he always tried to sneak extra scoops of ice cream for us when Mom wasn't looking. Olivia, too, seemed to ease into the atmosphere. She smiled, nodded, and laughed in the right places, just like I'd hoped. But then I began to notice something. A subtle shift. It wasn't anything overt, but it was there, the way she sat slightly apart from the group, her eyes not quite meeting anyone's gaze. I chalked it up to nerves. After all, meeting my extended family could be overwhelming, even for someone as confident as Olivia. But then, as my brother was telling a story about how Dad used to sneak us extra ice cream behind Mom's back, Olivia leaned in toward me, her voice barely a whisper. "It's nice that everyone has these sweet stories," she said, her eyes flicking over the group. "I just wish he'd left you all a little better set up for the future, you know?" I froze. It wasn't the kind of comment you make at a memorial. "What do you mean?" I whispered back, trying to keep my voice low, not wanting to draw attention. She shrugged, her tone casual. "I mean, he sounds like a great guy. But if he was so hardworking, don't you think he could have left more behind? For you, for your family." Her words hit me like a punch. The moment felt wrong, out of place. My father wasn't a millionaire, but he worked hard his entire life to make sure we had what we needed. He had left behind a modest inheritance, just enough to cover some debts and give my mom some security in her retirement. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. And to hear Olivia question that, here, in front of my family, in the middle of a night meant to celebrate his life, it stung. I couldn't even respond right away. "It's just something I've noticed," she added, as if it were a casual observation. "You work so hard, but you don't seem to have much to show for it." I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't find the words. I felt my chest tighten, but I told myself to let it go. Maybe it was just a poorly worded remark. Maybe I was overreacting. But even as I tried to rationalize it, the words lingered like an itch I couldn't scratch. I decided to let it go for now. I turned my attention back to the group, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But as the night wore on, Olivia's behavior grew harder to ignore. Every time someone mentioned Dad or told a funny story about his generosity, Olivia would tilt her head, a strange look in her eyes. It was like she was assessing everything through a lens of cold practicality, and I couldn't understand it. Then it happened again. As we were talking about our family vacations, the ones Dad had always insisted on taking, even if it meant stretching the budget a little, Olivia broke in, her voice louder this time than before. "So, who paid for all that?" she asked, looking around the table. "Was your dad just footing the bill for everything?" The room went silent. My sister awkwardly laughed, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, he was our dad. That's what parents do, right?" But Olivia didn't seem to get it. "Sure," she said, "but I mean, it must have been expensive. I'm just saying, it's no wonder there wasn't much left over." I could feel the heat rising in my face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad had made sure we had the experiences we needed, the moments that bonded us together as a family. And here she was, questioning it, turning everything into a financial calculation. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I pulled Olivia aside, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you bringing this up right now?" She looked genuinely confused, as if she didn't understand the gravity of the situation. "What? I'm just making conversation," she said, shrugging. "This isn't just conversation," I said, my voice tightening. "This is my father's memory. This isn't the time or place to talk about money." She rolled her eyes, clearly not taking me seriously. "Whatever," she muttered and walked back to her seat. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there for a moment, trying to steady myself. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding, just some awkwardness she didn't know how to handle. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Something in her that I hadn't seen before, and it wasn't pretty. The evening dragged on, the air heavy with discomfort. It felt like no one could quite look at Olivia the same way anymore, and I could feel the weight of their silence. The unease grew with every word she said, and I realized I was trying to ignore the signs. I didn't want to admit that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I loved, was beginning to reveal a side of herself that made me question everything. As the evening continued, the mood shifted from light-hearted nostalgia to something heavier. My mom stood up to give a short speech about Dad. Her voice, usually so strong and comforting, trembled just a bit as she talked about how generous he was, how he always put his family first, and how, no matter what, he always found a way to help others. Her words were beautiful, heartfelt, and filled the room with a warmth that made us all reflect on the man we had lost. It was the kind of moment that should have brought everyone closer together, reminding us of the love and strength that had defined our family. But as my mom finished, Olivia's voice cut through the air, as cold and calculating as ever. "Well, he sounds like he was a great guy," Olivia said, her words drifting out with an unsettling casualness. "Too bad he didn't think about securing his kids' futures a little more." The room fell deathly silent. I felt my stomach drop, the warmth of the evening evaporating as the words hung there like a dark cloud. My mom's face turned pale, her expression faltering as if she couldn't quite process what she had just heard. My brother looked at me wide-eyed, clearly unsure if he should speak up. But it was like everything around me had suddenly frozen. All I could focus on was Olivia's indifferent posture, like she hadn't just destroyed a tribute to my father with a single sentence. I couldn't even breathe for a moment. My pulse raced in my ears, and I tried to hold myself together, but it felt like the world was spinning out of control. I had to say something, anything, before the moment turned into something I couldn't take back. I looked at Olivia, my voice coming out sharper than I'd intended. "Olivia," I said, my tone trembling with disbelief, "what the hell are you talking about?" She barely looked up, as if she didn't understand the gravity of the situation. "I'm just saying," she shrugged, "it's nice that he helped strangers, but maybe he should have focused more on securing his own family's future." The casualness with which she said it sent a chill down my spine. How could she be so callous, so indifferent to the fact that we were sitting at a table honoring my father's memory? My chest tightened, the words I wanted to say stuck in my throat. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I stood up abruptly, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape against the floor. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands shaking. I pulled Olivia aside, away from the table, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice quieter now but no less firm. "Why are you bringing this up right now in front of everyone? This isn't the time or place." She looked at me, genuinely confused, as if I were the one making a big deal out of nothing. "What? I'm just making conversation," she said, her voice almost dismissive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the anger was already boiling up inside me. "This isn't just conversation, Olivia. You've been disrespecting my father's memory all evening. Why are you doing this?" Her response was nothing more than a shrug. "I'm not disrespecting anyone. I'm just being realistic. You all act like he was some kind of saint, but let's be honest, he didn't exactly set you up for success, did he?" My head spun. I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue. It felt like my whole world had shifted in an instant. Olivia's words, the way she casually dismissed everything I had loved and respected about my father, made me realize just how out of touch she was with what truly mattered. I tried to steady my breathing, to keep calm, but the anger was rising within me. This wasn't just about one comment, one moment of thoughtlessness. This was about her entire attitude toward the things that mattered most to me, my family, my father, my values. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep pretending it was all okay. The silence between us was thick and the tension in the room was palpable. I wanted to leave, to walk away from this moment, but I knew I had to do something more. I couldn't let her get away with this. Olivia, I said again, my voice shaking, this isn't just a misunderstanding. This is you showing me who you really are. And I can't ignore it anymore. She just blinked, unfazed, as if nothing had happened. And that was when I knew. I knew this was the turning point. This wasn't just a poorly timed comment. This was a glimpse into a side of her I couldn't ignore any longer. And it was the beginning of the end for us. The evening, once filled with laughter and fond memories, had now turned into something unrecognizable. The warmth from earlier had been replaced by an uneasy silence that clung to every corner of the room. Olivia's comments had already cut through the atmosphere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before she crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Dinner had been awkward. Conversations had dwindled, leaving behind the remnants of uncomfortable glances and half-hearted attempts to keep things going. I could feel my family's eyes on me, but I couldn't look at them. Not now. Not with what was hanging in the air. Olivia had already proven she didn't understand or didn't care that this was a night to honor my father. She'd made that clear. Then it happened. As dessert was served, my mom began telling a story about my dad's charity work. She spoke with pride about how he had volunteered at the food bank every Saturday, how he'd stayed late one night to help a single mother whose car had broken down. It was the kind of story that made you smile, that reminded you of the quiet, selfless man my father had been. And then Olivia spoke. Her voice was louder than it had been all evening, and the sharpness of it sliced through the room like a knife. "That's great and all," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "but don't you think he could have spent that time focusing on his own family? I mean, it's nice to help strangers, but maybe if he'd been a little more practical, you guys wouldn't have had to split what little he left behind." The room froze. I couldn't breathe for a second. I had heard her callously question my father's legacy before, but this was something else. This wasn't just a passing comment. This was a direct attack on everything my father stood for, on everything that had made him the man I admired. How could she be so cruel? So heartless? How could she sit there without an ounce of empathy and say something so vile? I looked around the table, desperate for someone to say something, to call her out. But the silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My mom's face went pale. She looked like she had been slapped, her words momentarily stuck in her throat. My brother's jaw clenched, and even my sister looked horrified. But Olivia didn't seem to notice. She just sat there, arms crossed, as if she had said nothing more than a trivial observation. That was the moment the last shred of doubt left me. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Olivia," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of what I was about to do. "What the hell is wrong with you?" She looked up at me, genuinely surprised. "What? Am I not allowed to have an opinion?" she asked, her voice more defensive than remorseful. "This isn't an opinion, Olivia," I shouted, my anger finally breaking free. "This is you disrespecting my father in front of everyone. In front of my family." Her face twisted in confusion, as if she couldn't understand why I was reacting this way. "I'm just being realistic," she shrugged, her words cutting through me like a knife. "You all act like he was some kind of saint, but let's face it, he didn't exactly set you up for success, did he?" The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. I could feel the eyes of my family on me, waiting for me to do something, anything. I knew what I had to do, but it still felt impossible. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the floor with an unsettling screech. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavier with every second. I turned to Olivia, my voice sharp and filled with the raw emotion that had been building throughout the evening. "We're done," I said, my voice shaking with both fury and resolve. "I can't do this anymore." She blinked, clearly not understanding the gravity of the moment. "What?" she asked, her voice rising with disbelief. "You're breaking up with me over this?" "Yes," I said, my chest tight with the finality of the words. "I'm done." This, I gestured toward her, toward the tension, toward everything she had said tonight. "This isn't something I can just overlook anymore. I can't spend my life with someone who disrespects my family, who disrespects my father's memory." Olivia opened her mouth, probably to argue, but I didn't let her. I pulled the engagement ring off my finger, holding it up for her to see before dropping it onto the table between us. The sound of the metal clinking against the surface was deafening. "Take it," I said coldly. "I'm done." The shock on her face was unmistakable, but I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses or justifications anymore. I had heard enough. There was no going back from this. This wasn't just about a single comment. This was about who she had shown herself to be. And I couldn't ignore it any longer. Her eyes narrowed, a flash of anger passing across her face, but I didn't care. She opened her mouth, but the words that came out were nothing more than a bitter laugh. Fine, she muttered, standing up from the table. You want to throw everything away over a couple of words? Go ahead, Thomas. Do whatever makes you feel better. But I couldn't listen to her anymore. I didn't want to. I watched as she grabbed her things, slinging her bag over her shoulder. The rest of the room was still, silent, as though they too were waiting for me to wake up from some nightmare. But there was no waking up. This was real. When she left, there was no apology. No attempt to explain herself. Just the sound of the door slamming behind her, leaving me standing there in the silence she had created. And in that silence, I realized that I had just made the hardest decision of my life, but also the right one. As I sat back down, the weight of the moment finally hit me. I had taken a stand, and for the first time all night, I felt like I could breathe again. The days after Olivia left were a blur. The apartment felt emptier than it had ever been, and the silence was suffocating. I spent most of my time alone, replaying the events of that night over and over in my head. The things she'd said, the way she'd acted, it all felt like a cruel puzzle piece that had been missing for far too long. How had I missed the signs? How had I ignored the whispers of doubt that had been there all along? I tried to focus on the little things, work, calls with friends, errands, but nothing seemed to hold my attention for long. There was an overwhelming sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the words Olivia had said, it was everything that had led up to that moment. One afternoon, my sister called me. I hadn't heard from her since the night of the breakup, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for another conversation about it. But she insisted. Hey, are you doing okay? She asked gently, her voice full of concern. I'm fine, I replied, though I knew it was far from the truth. I'm still processing everything. I get it, but there's something I need to tell you, she said, her tone becoming more serious. I sat up, suddenly alert. What is it? She hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully. A few weeks ago, I overheard Olivia talking to one of her friends at a family dinner. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but they were sitting close, and I heard her say something that, well, it didn't sit right with me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What did she say? She said, my sister paused, collecting her thoughts. She said that once you two got married, she was going to make sure you didn't give all your money to your mom and siblings. She was talking about how she'd control your finances, how she thought it would be better if she was the one calling the shots. I froze, the words hanging in the air like a weight I couldn't lift. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. How had I not seen it? Olivia hadn't just been critical of my father's choices. She had been planning all along to control me, to manipulate my relationship with my family for her own benefit. I leaned back against the couch, trying to process what my sister had just told me. The anger I felt when she first left began to transform into something else. Something heavier. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a realization that everything Olivia had said and done had been calculated, a part of a plan I'd never seen. You're telling me she's been planning this for a while? I asked, my voice low. Yeah, my sister said softly. I didn't want to say anything at first, but after seeing the way she acted that night, it all makes sense now. She was never about you, Thomas. She was about what you could give her. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, and they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Olivia had never loved me. Not the way I had loved her. She hadn't been interested in building a life together, in growing with me as partners. She had been interested in what I could provide. My family's money, the stability that came with it. I closed my eyes, letting the realization settle in. It was painful to admit, but it was the truth. And the truth was, I had avoided a future with someone who would have slowly torn me away from everything that mattered. The more I thought about it, the more I understood how deep her manipulations had run. The subtle jabs about money, the way she dismissed my father's hard work, those weren't just offhand comments. They were strategies. She had been testing the waters, seeing how far she could push before I noticed, before I took a stand. And I had been blind to it. But now I was awake. And while it was painful, I knew this was a turning point. I had learned something vital about myself through all of this, that I could stand up for what I believed in, for the people who truly mattered in my life. As I reflected on the relationship, it became clear to me that Olivia wasn't just a woman who had lost her way. She was someone who had never cared about my happiness, who had only ever cared about herself. And in the end, it was that realization that gave me a strange sense of relief. I didn't have to keep pretending that everything was fine. I didn't have to keep excusing the red flags that I had ignored. I was better off without her, and though it hurt to admit it, I was finally free from the weight of someone who had never had my best interests at heart. My phone buzzed with a message from my mom. Just a quick check-in, asking how I was holding up. I smiled a little as I read her message. Her support, my family's support, meant more to me than anything Olivia could have offered. They had always been there for me, and now I was beginning to realize just how much I needed them. Maybe I had been blind before, but I was seeing clearly now. I had lost someone, yes, but I had also gained a deeper understanding of myself and my family. And that, I realized, was far more important than anything Olivia could have ever given me. The morning after Olivia left, the apartment felt strangely empty. It wasn't just the physical space, though that was part of it, but the emotional vacuum that had been left behind. I had expected to feel something more, relief, anger, maybe even regret. But what I felt was quiet. An unsettling silence that seemed to echo through the empty rooms. It was like a door had been slammed shut, but no matter how hard I tried to look behind me, I couldn't see where it led. Later that afternoon, Olivia came back to the apartment to pack her things. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but it certainly wasn't what happened. She didn't apologize, didn't try to explain herself, didn't even seem surprised by the way things had ended. She moved about the apartment in silence, grabbing her belongings with a kind of detached efficiency that made my stomach twist. She was leaving, but it was as if she were simply checking something off a list. There was no remorse in her eyes, no attempt at reconciliation, just cold indifference. When she finally finished, she stood by the door, her bag slung over her shoulder, ready to walk out of my life for good. I knew I had to say something to make sure she understood what this meant. For both of us. Olivia, I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. I need you to understand something. All of this, the lies, the disrespect, the manipulation, I can't be a part of it anymore. I can't be with someone who sees everything in terms of what they can take from others. You don't love me, you never did. And I can't keep pretending that I didn't see it. Her lips curled into a faint, almost mocking smile. I see, she said simply, as if it didn't matter. Well, I'm glad you figured it out. The indifference in her voice made me realize just how much I had been wasting my time. I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. The person I had once thought I loved wasn't really her at all. She was a stranger, someone who had taken advantage of my love and my family's generosity, someone who didn't even have the decency to regret what she'd done. Take care, Olivia, I said, turning my back on her as I walked to the door, not wanting to look at her anymore. I never want to see you again. Without another word, she left. And just like that, the chapter closed. The door clicked shut behind her, and the emptiness I had been dreading began to fade. I felt the weight of it, the weight of what I had done, start to lift. The decision had been made, and there was no going back, but now I realized that was the point. There was nothing left to hold on to. In the days that followed, I found myself reconnecting with the things that mattered most, my family, my friends, my memories. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. There were days when I felt the sting of loss, when I questioned if I had made the right choice. But with every passing moment, the pain began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I had done what needed to be done. I had chosen myself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. My family rallied around me as they always had. They offered their support, their understanding, and their love. My mom hugged me one evening and she whispered, "Your father would be so proud of you." Those words hit me harder than anything I had expected. They weren't just about me standing up for my family, they were about standing up for what was right. For what truly mattered. In the end, I realized that the life I had almost built with Olivia wasn't the life I wanted at all. It was a life that was based on manipulation and lies, and I could never have been happy in it. But the life I was building now, one where I was surrounded by people who cared about me for who I was, not for what I could give them, that was the life I wanted. As time went on, I found myself smiling more, laughing again with the people who mattered, and feeling a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. The weight of Olivia's influence was gone, and I was free. There was no grand moment of closure, no dramatic final scene. Just a quiet realization that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that set you free. And in that freedom I found peace.